In the world of cycling, two opposing sides prepare for the ultimate showdown, each convinced they hold the secret to speed and strength. But which side will remain victorious, carbon or aluminum? Let's get into it.
And that's it for the carbon bar.
Carbon versus aluminum. The debate has been raging on for literally decades. Should you run a carbon frame? Are carbon wheels strong enough? Is carbon good for mountain biking? There's a lot to cover in today's video, but before we do, I want to give a huge shout out to today's sponsor, DT Swiss. They were kind enough to send me two of their brand new fixed gear wheel sets. The first is the TRC 1400 die cut. This is a carbon aerodynamic performance rim made for top level crit and track athletes. This thing is really sick. And even if you're not a crit athlete, it's gonna look sick on any build. And then there is the T1800 Classic, which is their aluminum rim, still very performance driven, bladed spokes, tubeless ready. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about these wheel sets in the video. A huge shout out again to DT Swiss. Thanks for making this happen. Carbon allows manufacturers to design frames in ways that were simply not possible with any other material. It's lightweight and very stiff, which is optimal across all bike applications. Not only that, but you can also build in compliance. Let's take a look at gravel bikes, for example. You want the power transfer to be as efficient as possible, the bottom bracket to be really stiff so that every ounce of power that the rider is putting in is getting transferred into the drivetrain. But the rider's also going to be riding over washboard and gravel, and that's going to be very bumpy. So you also want a frame to be a little bit compliant to soften out the ride. With carbon, you can do that. Carbon crank arms typically aren't that much lighter than their aluminum counterparts, but what they do offer is more stiffness, which if you're someone who's tracking every watt, can be very, very important. Carbon mountain bike handlebars, on the other hand, are designed to be more compliant than aluminum handlebars. They offer a more dampened ride feel on bumpy terrain. Carbon requires a little bit of tender love and care. While carbon might not rust in the rain like steel, it does require special love and care. It can be a little bit finicky. Torque specs, for example, have been in the cycling industry for a very long time, but they are even more important for carbon. Making sure that you're not under tightening or over tightening your components can be really important to make sure that you have a secure fit and you're not going to crush your carbon components. Speaking of crushing, I decided to do a little test in this video. I wanted to see how durable carbon actually is. So I decided to take a sledgehammer to some carbon bars and some aluminum bars and see how they fared. So stick around for that. Carbon has a reputation. I'm looking at you, Spinergy. It typically shatters instead of bending. And so when it fails, it really fails. But should you actually be concerned about the durability of carbon? Taking a look at rims, manufacturers can make very lightweight aerodynamic road wheels or make very beefy, durable, stiff mountain bike wheels. It all depends on how it's laid up, the thickness, and the intended use. When it comes to carbon being used in road cycling or even fixed gear riding, it's typically going to be designed to be as lightweight and as aerodynamic as possible. If designers are making a frame that is as lightweight as possible so that Tour de France rider can get up that hill just 1/10 of a second faster, they're focused on that, lightness, aerodynamics. My point in mentioning all of this is that durability is often at odds with lightness, and designers, manufacturers are trying to find a balance between the two. But in a lot of applications where carbon is being used, lightness is favored. And so it's not just the inherent qualities of carbon that make it strong or weak, but the design that it's being used in. Carbon is extremely strong and it's designed to handle tension, bending forces. What it's susceptible to is compressive impacts. I personally wouldn't run it on my freestyle or BMX bikes because I know I'm gonna throw that thing against a rail or a wall, or it's gonna fall down a flight of stairs. There's a lot of compressive impacts, and I think that's why we don't see more carbon in BMX. That, and also BMXers are just kind of buffer skateboard dirtbags. And I say that with all the love. Because this is a fixed gear focused channel, I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of cycling purists who see this video. There is something really cool about classic components, classic design, the reliability, the fact that you can go into a shop and find replacement parts and not have to put batteries on your bike. I've recently gotten into tinkering with old vintage mountain bikes, and as much fun as that is, I also really enjoy ripping down a trail on my fancy carbon mountain bike.
Carbon is a relatively new material, and when it comes to the long-term durability over years, decades even, there's a big question mark. And a classic bike from 100 years ago might still be rideable today, but will carbon bikes from today be rideable in 100 years? I don't really know, and I personally don't have the knowledge to get into this topic. GCN has a great video, a few videos where they go in depth on carbon. I will link to those in the description if you want to do a deeper dive.
Is more expensive better? Carbon in almost every case is going to be more expensive than aluminum, but is it better? As consumers, we're told to believe that spending more money equals more happiness, but obviously that isn't always true. And I would argue that 90% of cyclists aren't fully optimizing the performance of their bicycle and don't necessarily need the top of the line, top greatest products. All of that being said, do whatever makes you happy. I'm not one to talk. I like having some bling fancy parts on my bikes for sure. Manufacturing is extremely important when it comes to carbon. It is a complex process. So if you are choosing carbon parts, I think it's extremely important to go with reputable brands that you know are really putting in the attention and detail that is necessary towards manufacturing quality carbon. Carbon is a very labor-intensive process, and it's also not the most environmentally friendly. Now, I can't answer whether or not carbon's impact is a deal breaker for you. I think that's a personal question. What I will say is that I think if you're going to go with carbon, you should choose a reputable brand, do your research, one for your own sake, because crappy carbon is probably more likely to fail, but also having a peace of mind that knowing that the manufacturing process is one that actually lives up to the standards. If you find some random cheap carbon knockoff, there's a reason that it's probably cheaper.
I told you we'd get into some smashing, and now it's that time. It's time for smashing. I have some old carbon riser bars that I'm not using anymore, and also some aluminum drop bars from I think the 90s. I'm gonna take the sledgehammer to both of them and see which one fails first. Let's see how this goes. I'm gonna give them both a good whack with my sledgehammer. Can't really see it, but I can feel a crack at the end that it got smushed. It didn't really add any damage. Fully squished, there's still nothing. The aluminum is not doing so hot. Some fibers coming off now. I can start to peel it back now. Almost touching, but not quite. It's definitely compromised now. Oh, and that's it. Definitely took some hits and abuse, more than I would have expected. Pretty good. This is a DH handlebar, so did pretty well.
Aluminum is real, or is it? This video has mainly been focused on carbon, which makes sense because there's the most variety. It's the newest, the fanciest, the coolest, but I think we need to take a step back and take a look at aluminum, or as the people at GCN would say, aluminium. Aluminum is a tried and true cycling material, and there's a reason for it. It has a high strength to weight ratio. It's non-corrosive. Aluminum is also very stiff, which can be both a good thing and a bad thing. When it comes to cranks, it's good to have very stiff cranks. For frame sets, if you're riding on the road, you might not want the stiffest frame because it's going to give you a really harsh ride feel. When it comes to metal components, frames, handlebars can be made out of both steel or aluminum, but all other components on a bike are typically made from aluminum. Aluminum is typically lighter weight than steel, and it's also less compliant. It's also non-corrosive, so if you happen to leave your bike out in the rain one day, it won't rust. I still don't recommend it though. Aluminum can also be finished in a number of ways: painted, polished, or anodized, which I think is one of the coolest. I love a good anodized component.
It seems like the bike industry is starting to embrace aluminum more and more. For a long time, it seemed like the industry was only interested in chasing the top tier technology at whatever cost. But now, as the industry has gone through a boom and now a bust, they need to provide consumers with more value for people who are price conscious.
You can get almost every component on your bike made of carbon. Carbon spacers, carbon stems, carbon cranks, carbon headset caps, carbon bottle cages. Everything comes in carbon. If you're going to be choosy about where you spend your dollars on carbon, which components are going to give you the most benefit?
Before I answer this question and go into some of my final thoughts, I want to take a closer look at my new carbon and aluminum wheel set to see how they compare. Starting with the TRC 1400, the carbon wheel set, I'm going to be putting this on my MASH AC3. I've got it built up to be super speedy right now. I've got the heavy gear ratio. I've got the integrated carbon handlebars, which I'm really excited about. The only issue that doesn't make it quite so fast is the guy riding it. I'm sure that this new wheel set will help me get some marginal gains, and hopefully my placing at the local crit races won't be so embarrassing. The front wheel is radial laced, 16 spokes, and the rear is 20 spokes, 1 cross. Both of these have beautiful bladed spokes. A component that may get overlooked is the actual hub set. Low profile aerodynamic hubs, super sick. It's got the female axle. I assume that these are straight pull spokes because I'm not seeing a J-bend, which makes the whole design just look even more clean. These ones come in at 62 millimeters, which is not ridiculous. It's a nice aerodynamic shape, and it's carbon. People back in the day were rocking rims that were at least this deep, but they were aluminum, which made them super heavy. This wheel set weighs 200 grams less than the aluminum wheel set from DT Swiss, and I'm guessing, I don't know, pounds lighter than the crazy wheels people were rocking back in the day. Since I first recorded this video, I've had a chance to put on a few more miles on the bike, and let me tell you, this thing freaking rips. New wheels feel amazing, super light. The whole bike is just super aggressive now. I put on some Pursuit bars, which I know are not everyone's cup of tea, but I really love the riding position. Aggressive, fast. I even podiumed at an Alley Cat earlier this week, which I was really stoked on, an accomplishment for me. And I'm excited to just keep trying to push the limits. I'm going to throw on some tubeless tires, which I'm excited to try. I've never tried that before. And I'm even gonna try clipless pedals. This bike is just too fast not to try clipless pedals. So moving on to the T1800 Classic, the aluminum wheel set from DT Swiss. I'm gonna be putting this on my EIA bare knuckle. It's a steel frame. I've had it for 15 years. It was my first nice fixed gear bike and is still a bike that I really, really love. This wheel set is much more of an all-rounder, still very performance driven, but gonna be able to take the abuse of daily riding. It has 24 spokes on the rear, 20 in the front, and both come with these beautiful bladed spokes. The rear hub comes with fixed threading on both sides and comes in this beautiful polished look. I already have some silver parts on my bare knuckle, so I thought it would go perfectly. Both wheel sets are tubeless ready. I'm gonna be checking back in with a long-term review once I get some miles on these wheel sets, so make sure you hit that subscribe button.
If you're looking at weight savings primarily, you want to start with obviously the most heavy components, which are typically frame, fork, and wheels. Anything outside of that probably isn't going to make a huge weight difference. In fact, things like carbon spacers can actually be heavier. But wait, there's one more thing to consider, because not all weight on a bicycle is considered equal. Reducing rotational weight, aka wheel weight, is going to have an even bigger impact than anywhere else on your bike. What that means is that if you remove 100 grams from your frame, it's not going to feel as much as removing 100 grams from your wheels. It's going to help with acceleration, climbing, and handling.
So the reason that rotational weight makes a bigger difference is because of the gyroscopic effect. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to pretend like I fully understand this, but you can demonstrate this pretty easily by taking a wheel. You can twist it pretty easily when it's not in movement, but as soon as you start spinning it, it becomes a lot more difficult to manipulate, and that's because of the gyroscopic force.
So when it comes to the age-old debate of carbon versus aluminum, I think what really matters is your priorities as a cyclist, and there is no one catch-all answer. Carbon offers impressive weight savings and advanced engineering for those that are chasing top-of-the-line performance. Aluminum remains a solid choice for those who appreciate durability, cost savings, and the classic feel of a well-made bike. At the end of the day, it all comes down to personal preference, and I really don't think that you can go wrong nowadays. I hope that you learned something from this video. I had a fun time putting it together. Again, shout out to DT Swiss for helping out with the wheels. I'm very excited about them. Check out foadgang.com, foadgang on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.